We are diving into a massive question today, and we're using the work of legendary investor Ray Dalio as our guide. He studied the rise and fall of empires for years, and what he's found suggests we are living through one of the biggest power shifts in modern history. So let's just get right to it. The big question on everyone's mind, is the American empire actually ending? Now, that sounds pretty dramatic, I know, but according to Dalio's data, it's a question we absolutely have to ask. We're going to unpack this thing like a detective solving a mystery, using his framework to see what's really going on. You know, the world order that most of us have grown up in, the one with the US at the center of global power and finance, it was all set up back in 1945, right after World War II. But here we are nearly 80 years later, and all the signs are pointing to a huge, fundamental change coming over the horizon.
And this is where Ray Dalio's work becomes so interesting. See, he didn't just wake up one day with a hunch. No, he crunched 500 years of economic data, and he believes he's found a predictable, repeating cycle that explains how great powers rise and how they fall. He calls it the big cycle.
Okay, so to really get a handle on what's happening now, we first have to understand this historical pattern. Let's take a look at the blueprint for how empires are born, how they thrive, and, well, how they eventually decline. If you look back over the last 500 years, the pattern is kind of hard to ignore. In the 1600s, you had the Dutch Empire, and their currency, the guilder, was king. Then the British Empire took over, and the pound sterling was the world's go-to currency. And since 1945, it's been the American Empire, and of course, the US dollar, which became the world's reserve currency. See the pattern here? Each empire has its time in the sun. Dalio breaks this whole cycle down into 6 key stages. It always kicks off with a new order after a huge war. Then, things get built up. You get a nice period of peace and prosperity. But all that success often leads to financial bubbles and a massive gap between the rich and poor. And that brings us to the really dangerous part, stage 5, major financial problems and deep, angry internal conflict. That's the stage that usually leads to the end. So, the million-dollar question, where does Ray Dalio think the United States is in this cycle right now? Well, according to his analysis, the U.S. is squarely in the middle of that critical, turbulent stage 5. This is the part of the story defined by serious money troubles and internal fighting. Now, Dalio isn't just going off a feeling. He points to 3 specific, measurable signs that an empire has hit this dangerous 5th stage. Think of these as the 3 biggest clues in our investigation: a shaky financial situation, really bad internal conflict, and at the same time, the rise of a powerful rival. Let's dig into each one. First up, the money. It's a pretty simple formula, really. When a country spends way more than it brings in year after year, it ends up with a mountain of debt. And to pay the bills, the government often turns to the only solution it has left, printing tons and tons of money. And what's the inevitable result of all that money printing? You guessed it, inflation. At the time Dalio was doing this analysis, U.S. inflation had shot up to 8.5%, the highest it had been in 40 years. That means every single dollar in your pocket was losing its value, fast. This whole situation is what led Dalio to make that now famous, very blunt statement, cash is trash. Because when inflation is running that high, just holding on to cash guarantees that you're losing purchasing power. Your money is literally melting like an ice cube on a hot day. All right, clue number 2 is severe internal conflict. Dalio points out that the U.S. is going through a level of political polarization that we just haven't seen in generations. The space between the left and the right has become this giant canyon with almost no middle ground left. And here's where it gets, well, frankly, pretty scary. Dalio's research team found a survey where an unbelievable 15% of people in one political party said they wished their opponents would literally die. I mean, we're not just talking about political disagreements anymore. That is a sign of a society starting to crack at the seams. So let's move on to that third and final indicator, the rise of an external rival. Because what history shows us is that while the dominant empire is busy dealing with all its problems at home, another power is often getting stronger and stronger, getting ready to challenge the whole system. And this chart just lays it all out, doesn't it? When you put the US and China side by side on some of Dalio's key metrics, the trend is crystal clear. While the US is struggling with its finances and internal divisions, China looks stronger in those areas and is catching up incredibly fast in things like education and technology. And look, this isn't some abstract thing that might happen in the future. It's already here. In what is a huge signal of this economic shift, China has already blown past the United States to become the #1 trading nation in the entire world. That is a massive milestone. So the evidence that the world order is changing is, well, it's pretty compelling. The next logical question is, what in the world does this mean for us? For you and me? How do you even begin to navigate a shift this big? Luckily, Dalio has some pretty clear advice on that.
So, what can you do? Dalio says before you even think about investing, you have to get your own house in order. First, calculate what he calls your runway. Basically, how long could you survive if your income just stopped tomorrow? Then, your first job is to build up enough emergency savings to cover that runway. That's your financial safety net.
Okay, once you've built that foundation, Dalio's #1 rule for investing in times like these is diversification. In other words, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't go all in on just crypto or just gold. The goal is to build a balanced portfolio of different things, stocks, bonds, maybe some commodities, so that you can weather whatever storm comes your way.
So, back to our original question, is the American empire ending? Dalio's big cycle suggests it's definitely in a period of serious decline, facing challenges from both inside and out. But history is clear on one thing. These cycles always end, and a new world order always rises from the ashes of the old one. The only real question left is, are you prepared for what comes next?